coming, no matter what time it is, wherever you are. My name is Tessa Cum, and I work for Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria, and I administer for the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens. Just a quick preamble, the last Horticulture Forum, Sam Brockington from Cambridge University Botanic Gardens was kind enough to give us an overview of the paper recently published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, which looked at over a century of accession records for botanic gardens all around the world, amassing essentially a giant meta collection. And they analysed this data and pulled some really amazing insights from it. And that is the purpose of today's meeting. Before we get underway, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which I live and work, and upon which Royal Botanic Gardens is situated, which is the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. Our landscape has over 65,000 years of careful stewardship, which we are only just beginning to appreciate and understand and learn from as well. So I pay my respects to elders past and present. It's also 5 a.m. here for me, so I apologize as I'm tripping over my words and a little bit slow on the uptake as well. Okay, so let's get underway. First of all, and the off chance that anyone hasn't had a chance to read the paper yet, I've just dropped a link in chat there. It's a fantastic paper.
Whoa, man. Yeah.
Hello, we can. Welcome, welcome.
Hi.
And I have we'll go to present mode. I also took the time to make slides of every single graphic that is present in the paper. So if any of you have wanted to call one out, let me know and I'll dig it up and find it. But essentially, this is the abstract. As I said, a data, 2.2 million records, which is an incredible amount of records to analyze. So getting into it. Yep. Good. Cool. Can I get into presentation mode? Is it going to let me? No, it's not going to. Okay. First, I'll open it up to the floor. If anybody has had any, just burning observations, comments, or insights that they wanted to just dive in and throw out there, please feel free to do it now. But I have also come up with a bunch of questions that I found this study raised in particular. So if nobody wants to dive in, I'm going to throw you homework right away. All right. One of the biggest takeaways from the study was the impact, essentially, of the CBD in terms of botanic gardens around the world doing their best to collect plant material ethically, properly, whereas the people who are poaching and collecting from the wild unethically, of course, pay absolutely no attention to it whatsoever. And the CBD has had a massive impact on what has been ethically and formally sourced. So I was wondering, looking at that, which is just such an incredible impact. I think you said it was something like 44% drop in wild collected and a 38% drop in internationally sourced material after the CBD was brought in. In light of that, those of you in Botanic Gardens, what has actually helped and enabled you to collect wild material or internationally sourced wild material, in your experience in recent years? And again, to people who have joined, this is being recorded, but if you wish to contribute to the discussion and not necessarily have your opinions captured, feel free to just populate the chat. That will not be captured in the video whatsoever. And if anybody wants to jump in at any point, please, I would love to get a discussion going. As you can see, I'm struggling with the 5 a.m. in the beginning to articulate, so please feel free to, talk and take up some space. I beg you.
Well, kia ora koutou. I might start then if
Yeah, please go for it.
Yeah, we've got one. Ethan.
Ethan,
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. I know I'm in the Bahamas. For us, it wasn't so much the Convention on Biological Diversity as much as it has been the Nagoya Protocol. And we're a native plant preserve, so we're entirely focused on just the plants of the Bahamas. So we're not exporting anything, but the way the Nagoya Protocol was implemented within the Bahamas was largely that all researchers, everybody, anything that was going on was considered theft. And they basically shut down most of the entire system, increased permitting to the level that it became unaffordable to anybody, drove out all researchers. And basically, when in 21, when Nagoya was implemented for the Bahamas, we went and lost 99% of the research and collecting, and that was being done in the Bahamas. And now there's zero happening. We're able to do some work on our own, but it has entirely shut down all science and research within the Bahamas. They even wanted students at the local university to get permits to do like herbarium specimens for their botany classes and things like that. I mean, they took a very, very draconian approach in the Bahamas.
Who's they?
That would be the Department of Environmental Protection and Planning, which runs essentially the permitting system and things like that. So they were basically they basically just shut down any permits. And not that it was completely shut down, but it became very difficult and very onerous to be able to get them. They've backed off somewhat, but
yeah, it's really I mean, I guess two thoughts in my head. One, should we be documenting and quantifying this Nagoya impact? Well, three thoughts. There's that. The second is, from my understanding, that's exactly what happened in Brazil post CBD. So the same kind of reaction to legislative change is to shut down. And I suppose, the irony is in the these both of these pieces of legislation, or I guess Nagoya even more than CBD, is about access benefit sharing, and that term access is in is in ABS, right? But the response to ABS legislation is actually to shut down access, and without access, there can be no benefits to share. So it's a really not very well thought through response to global legislation.
In New Zealand, we've had a similar experience. So, good morning. My name's Tim Park. I'm the manager at Ōtari Native Botanic Garden. So similarly, we run a botanic garden of native plants from around New Zealand. And our collections peaked at around 1,200 taxa, and is currently dropping. And my colleague Claire contributed our data to the study. Yeah, so we've had an increase in difficulty in obtaining permits from our Department of Conservation, our national body that administers permissions to collect from public conservation land. And so that has pretty much takes over a year to get a permit, and similar issues to what Ethan was talking about in Bahamas, where any collection requires a permit for simple herbarium specimens, or even taxonomic research. I think the department is required to basically consult and get the permission of the Indigenous people of the land, which we believe is a valid process. But as a large landowner, they have obviously long-standing relationships with the Indigenous people as well. So those relationships between the department and the Indigenous people are varied. And so those conversations around someone else getting permission to come in that they need to have are not always easy conversations to have. And also within Indigenous people in Aotearoa, is not necessarily capacity or capability to understand and respond and be involved in the research to share the benefits and access to those materials. Where there is capacity, we are more enabled to do that work. So we really focus on supporting those Indigenous organisations to become involved in the collection process and share in the material that we collect and provide it back to them in a reciprocal way. Yeah, so that's kind of where so it has changed, but from a collection point of view, I think that's not a great thing. But I think from a knowledge sharing and it's a good thing, because we're deepening those relationships and that connection to land, and our Indigenous people see themselves as related to the plants and animals of their land. So it's a relation of theirs that we're taking when we collect. So it's quite a deep relationship that we have to respect.
Yeah. Interestingly, in contrast, in Australia, the Nagoya Protocol, we're a signatory, but we haven't ratified it. But essentially, the what is outlined in the Nagoya Protocol is written into our permits and the agreements, and it's essentially taken that if you're applying for a permit, the discussion with the First Nations people has already taken place. And in a lot of ways, that means that we don't have to wait, say, the year, as you say, to get a permit. But it also means that in our case, it's very easy to circumnavigate the First Nations people as a whole, because they're already lumped into the terms of the permit. So we can sort of just go in and collect and assume that administration has been taken care of. So we're not necessarily making the effort to build those relationships, which are necessary and very important, especially in terms of reconciliation and the like. So it's just out of curiosity, Bahamas and New Zealand, did the Nagoya was ratified in either case? Not sure.
I'm not actually sure.
Yeah.
I would have to go and actually verify. I know for the Bahamas, they were early signatories to the CBD, and have always been proponents of it. And I know largely it's been ratified. So I would have to check to see if the Nagoya Protocol itself was ratified separately.
Tessa, is that I'm Patricia Malcolm from BGCI. Just curious, is that when you're saying when you go for permits, you don't have, that conversation already happened about ABS with Indigenous people. Is that the same case for permits for people from outside of Australia? How does it happen for material?
Good question. I am not sure.
Okay, just
having normally, because we have gone from RBGV in Melbourne, we have undergone collecting trips and had international botanists and the like join in, and they sort of come in under the permit that we use, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's normally also how we go when we go interstate as well. Sometimes we might be able to get our own permit, but depending on the state and the level of protectiveness they have about their flora, sometimes we'll be going in under the permit from, say, a different state herbarium to do the collecting there. So, and there's been a thing recently, I think, where it's going to be more difficult to get Australian flora out of Australia as well. Haven't quite looked into that. It's hard enough trying to get anything into the country, let alone get it out, but that's going to complicate plant material exchanges going forward as well for us. But just out of curiosity, just to go back to the original question, so it doesn't feel like we're all completely stuck, has anybody found anything that has worked for them in terms of actually getting wild or international source material? An example for us recently is we've been successful in bringing in acorns from the United States for like scrub and arid oaks, which are great for Melbourne's future climate. But basically that was an incredibly long process by one of our curators where she developed not just relationships with San Diego Botanic Gardens and the Los Angeles Arboretum, but a personal, one-on-one specialized relationship with somebody in the quarantine department. So she could explain that the laws that we have set up regarding quarantine, biosecurity, and all that sort of thing are generally looking at agriculture, large industry importing and exporting, or massive scientific research, not necessarily for conservation. Botanic gardens, I find, tend to fall in just off the side of most laws and legislations. Like they're the weird exception to everything. The rules don't quite fit for everything. And so basically together they had to find a way to sort of adhere to the requirements of biosecurity and phytosanitation, still adhere to the requirements in terms of what is permitted in terms of taxonomy. We have a white list, a list of taxa that can be imported rather than a black list, which is not. So it can be, from a botanic garden point of view, it can be incredibly difficult to bring interesting new species in simply because, there isn't massive amount of research and PhD on it. And if you want to add a species to the whitelist, you essentially need to submit a PhD's worth of research for the department to look over and have a look at. But yes, she basically developed a one-on-one relationship with someone in the department in order to bring in acorns. A relationship developed in terms of the freight carrier and then in terms of the treatment facility as well. It was incredibly complicated for, about 20 acorns, massive success, but the amount of work required was incredible. And of course, legislation keeps changing. It just changed again. So they have to keep going back and saying okay, how can we make it work this time? Does anybody have some inspiring, hopeful stories in that sort of regard?
I mean, for us, it's always been about the in-country relationships, right? That actually, in many senses, I was surprised. I was surprised by the drop due to CBD, because I guess that since I've really been in charge of expeditions and stuff in the gardens to 2015, which you can see on that graph is basically a level, is a new equilibrium, right? That actually we reached this new normal, and I mean I think the power balance has changed, and that's what CBD in Nagoya is meant to achieve. So in some sense, it's a really effective example of global legislation, and I don't think we should forget that, especially in an era when global legislation is a little bit under attack. But I mean, for us, it's just been about relationships, personal relationships, a bit like you've been saying about developing these personal relationships with people in key positions in country, signing MOUs with institutions, and trying to strive for, not yet achieve, but striving for this sort of bilateral partnership, which is slightly less extractive, and that involves inviting people to Cambridge to spend some time here and do some skills exchange and that kind of thing. So Yeah, for us, that's what it comes down to. But it's very difficult, I think, to maintain international relationships overseas. It's time consuming.
Definitely. Yeah, please, Anthony.
Hi, Tony Aiello from Longwood Gardens. So we've been fortunate. I would say we belong to two plant collecting consortia. One is something called NACPEC, which is focused on China for the last 30 years or so. And the other is basically a group of about 20, and that's about 9 or 10 gardens in North America. And then the other is Sam, you guys just joined Plant Collecting Collaborative, which is 20 some gardens in mostly in the US, but also now in Europe as well. And so by doing that, we've been able to sort of leverage our efforts so that if a few institutions go someplace, then that material can be shared among all the institutions. And then also, it allows, all the weight doesn't fall on one institution in terms of keeping those relationships going. So it's sort of a many hands making light work approach. And it's, both have been really successful. One, the China group, because it's focused on China and really focused on maintaining those relationships over the years. China has been interesting and it continues to evolve. I'm actually heading there on Friday. The issue for a long time with getting permits in China is that there was not a process in place. And so we did the best we could to get whatever permits we could. There was no national permitting process in China, and there may not still be a national level permitting process. So that made life challenging in a lot of ways. And we always and again, because the United States is a signatory but not hasn't ratified CBD, we always sort of follow the spirit of CBD. So I think so. One thing is that access and benefit sharing, and always looking with our partners, always looking at ways of providing benefit sharing. And looking at China, I've been going there for almost 25 years. What that means has really evolved, and so I think that's one lesson that I've taken from that, is that nothing about this is static, and that it's an ever evolving process. And I think if I have a big takeaway, is that forming these collaboratives is really essential in order to achieve a variety of goals. So we've in many ways, Longwood and other partners have been really fortunate in terms of being able to collect and bring in material. Having said that, there's a group. My colleague Peter Zale is in Tajikistan right now, and apparently, as they were planning, sort of a lot of geophytes, especially tulips, were just getting red listed like almost daily. It felt like to them, so that it felt like that door was closing before their very eyes. So I don't know what to basically what this chart is saying. I don't know. I think there's a solution there, but it just becomes a lot more challenging in terms of getting those listed plants, getting permits for those listed plants. So it'll be interesting to see what their lessons are at the end of this trip to Tajikistan.
Yeah, definitely. No, there is. Let's get on to threatened designation.
Can I just make one point, Tessa, before you move on, just with respect to that? Just go back a couple of slides. Sorry, is that annoying? Yeah, keep going. That one. Sorry. So wild's leveled off, and wild, like, we're equating to CBD, but of course you can collect wild from your own country, right? So BGCI keep making this interesting point that actually, it's not like as soon as CBD made, if we're attributing that drop to CBD, it's not like we immediately went out and compensated for the failure to get that international material by sampling material that was more politically available. And so a more direct measure of CBD is the next graph, right? Which is if you just move on one, sorry, the other way.
Oops.
Sorry, going
Wait.
back. One more. Yeah, because this is movement, native and non-native, and movement across international boundaries. And here you see a similar thing. It's a bit messier, but you still see that CBD peak. But I think what really interests me is what's happening at the very right-hand side of that graph, because Nagoya is quite a recent thing. But you can just begin to see just where it begins to change trajectory is around 2014, I think, which is for me is a big date in. I mean, I know we've heard 21 from Ethan, but like for Europe, it was 2014 was kind of the big Nagoya wake up call, and so to see that change of trajectory makes me think that we may see like a fresh plummet, right, which is Nagoya associated. But I think we would need to wait another 5-10 years to see where that materializes. But that's when you really begin to see gardens saying, okay, well, with Nagoya in place, things have really changed in terms of the biodiversity governance, and that's when we're going to become more regionalized, which is, I think, what I would call, just growing your native plant. So I do think we're in for an interesting ride potentially with Nagoya, and I'm not sure where that takes us.
Yeah, Nagoya has the capacity to be very subjective from country to country. I think we can see that. Yeah, I know.
Sorry,
definitely. Go on.
No, you were just going to move on to the threatened plants, and I didn't want to disrupt that segue that you had there.
No, yeah, Nagoya plays into that as well in a way. Just in terms of collecting native plants. As I said, that's sort of governed from state to state within Australia. Queensland, for example, the beautiful tropical sunshine state that is on most of our tourism posters, is almost draconian about their flora. They don't want you to collect the perfectly common as muck stuff, let alone anything that is rare or threatened. So that's one of those things where there's the idea of, as you say, just removing access as a whole as a way of protecting, without sort of recognizing that climate change, pests, diseases and pathogens and land usage is already threatening these species, and not allowing conservationists to come in for collections and ex situ and the like is not helping that cause as it was. Where did we go? But I wanted to go back talking about the threatened stuff, because another, I think, a really important insight from this study is the response to a threatened designation, which is simply that as a whole, or at least within this meta collection, there really isn't a measured response to a threatened, rare, endangered designation. We all know that the number of plants being designated thus on the red list or in our own countries of the like is increasing, and increasing like fairly exponentially, I would say, more than we have the capacity to respond to. But that response is really negligible as it is. And I was just wondering, for your particular context, do you know what the hurdles are that are sort of stopping that response from happening? In the paper, they mentioned the obvious one, which is that plants that are rare are obviously going to be rare and hard to collect. There aren't that many of them, or that are available in the wild to therefore collect and conserve, which is a very straightforward obstacle. I can say in terms of Australia that reporting, or I should say notification, I think is a hurdle for us. Something we definitely need to work on. But then, of course, I'm sure there's the same as everyone else's resources. I don't know. We can get a couple of collecting trips going interstate a year, maybe a few more locally around ourselves. But yeah, getting out there is also quite an undertaking. So comments, please. Oh, the silence.
I mean, I think you can come up with a lot of barriers. the question for me is almost how do you sequence those barriers? I mean, what order do you rank those barriers, right? What are the true barriers, and what are just kind of apathetic barriers or that kind of thing? I mean, I would love to do a survey of this room, but I've been sort of asking people, look, do you really believe in ex situ conservation in living collections? Do you really believe in it? And I don't mean that in a sense that I'm desperate for people to believe in it, right? Because I think there's really valid reasons not to believe in it. You always get this very vacillating answer, right? From people who manage living collections, who really work with living collections and know how they operate and don't operate. The idea of conserving threatened plants in our landscapes is I think deeply troubling for a lot of people, more than we'd admit to, because because we feel a kind of moral imperative not to articulate that, to question that kind of belief and value, right? And I just think, are we not doing this because actually we don't think it's a very effective strategy? And that's kind of heretical, but
I think you're bang on, Sam. That's a really good assessment. Well, I struggle with a dichotomy, really. Because the longer you have material outside its natural range in ex situ management, the more difficult that starts to change generationally, right? And it adapts to the local conditions. So that then you return it to the wild, and it doesn't like it anymore because it's adapted to somewhere else after a number of generations.
Yeah, I've always wondered exactly. We go from wild to wild origin. I mean, how many sort of iterations of wild origin can you go before it's like, this isn't wild anymore?
Like
We've got
just a
some
good
genetic
example.
material, but
Yeah, we've got a plant called Ingalingamita, which is one of the rarest trees in New Zealand, and it's from a very limited distribution on offshore islands. We've got 2 generations growing in our gardens. I won't send the second generation seed back to the wild because even though it's got nothing to cross with, it has changed the character of it. So I'll only send the first gen seed back because I know that it's from wild source material and it's crossed with other wild source material, definitely. But where we've got the chance of cross pollination within the collections, within different, because we've got lots of plants growing together, we don't generally use our seed unless we've, completely isolated those individuals, which is difficult at scale if you've got if you want to create a large enough meta collection to do that.
And that's the key word, right, Tim? That's what I've been thinking about for about a month. That there's 2 words: at scale.
Yeah.
Because one can believe one can do it maybe for a couple of species or things that do really well in your niche or things where you have I don't know, some resource expertise grant, but it's the question of scale. And then people are like, well, I only believe we can do it if we all did it, because that's what you need. It would have to be all in for it to be at scale.
Yeah, well, so there's some successful examples I'm aware of in Australia where they're doing work on myrtles that are critically endangered and being impacted by myrtle rust, where they've got massive greenhouses with trees growing in them as seed orchards with specific genotypes collected, and they're allowing them to cross-pollinate within a contained environment. But that's quite an extreme measure for one species, and you've got hundreds of threatened species. Like in our collections, a third of our collections are threatened, of our 1,200 species. So we've got quite, we only really send back cutting material because we don't know what the what the parentage is in terms of it is a problematic thing, and I think my take on the paper was that there's global like policy decisions and they've had impacts, but the organizational processes to catch up with that, so that our national governments say, hey, these are the new rules. We have to develop systems and processes over time to enable them to be functional, so that it takes time for those the processes around permitting or whitelisting or blacklisting to occur. And in the meantime, things stop because there is no system. And I think that's part of the problem as well. So even though the legislation may be enabling, like the sharing thing, it isn't necessarily read that way, and the systems aren't necessarily in place to enable those things to happen. So and the capacity is not there to undertake that work. Yeah.
I would like to jump in for a moment. I'm not sure. I think there's really a connection between how many species are getting designated versus what goes on in a meta collection, or if there is, it's going to be a lagging indicator. We have done a lot of work over the last 2 decades on training red listers and getting out there. And I can tell you, with the access to digital information, your ability to get a species red listed is very, very easy compared to getting a species into a meta collection. And that we will see that now that we're doing training on conservation horticulture, hopefully we'll see that pick up as more and more places move over to actually thinking about conservation. And now that we have all this digital information about where these threatened species are, that we'll see that pick up. And I don't think it's because people don't care about meta collections. I think it's more about how well we're doing in terms of red list training and getting things red listed.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Sam's got thinking face on.
No, that's all right. just having my pessimism challenged. It always makes me think.
I would say also there's a change in gardens missions and visions that need to change for that to happen. That's what I mean, you've seen it in Cranbourne, right? Cranbourne Botanic Gardens, that they was when I was there in 20, whenever it was that I was there in
22.
Yeah. That the garden was mainly designed as an architectural beauty, not really knowing where the plants, it didn't matter where the plants came from. And then they changed it from that to a garden to do with, your native flora of the state. So I think that needs to happen as well. But, I'm an optimist in that side.
Go on then. Can I come back on Ethan then? So I mean, in a way, your point's about the disparity of the curves, right? You're saying, look, we've done a fantastic job of training red list assessors. It's a really well kind of resourced and actually kind of democratized in a way. I mean, of course, it's got to get through ICN and be approved, but that it's the training is out there and it's driving this huge growth in assessment. But supposing you just took that orange curve out of the equation, then you looked at the blue line, and I think we do that at some point. I mean, regardless of that, you've still got a very, very slow level of incremental growth. I guess my point is it's not just about the disparity. It's the fact that we've been talking about the global strategy on plant conservation has been around since what, 88 or 92, or it's been around for 2 to 3 decades, right? And
no, it hasn't. The global strategy really just got incorporated into CBD in 2009.
So when was the Gran Canaria Declaration there?
That was 99.
99, okay.
But it didn't become part of the CBD for another 10 years. So we're only talking about 15 years of it being in place.
Why does incorporation in the CBD make it the moment at which one measures the baseline?
It's when it actually gets promoted out there. I mean, up until then, it was just a bunch of botanists talking to each other at a few meetings. And then when it got incorporated, then it got pushed of, hey, this is the strategy. This is what countries should be doing.
Yeah, okay.
And then the Botanic Gardens start investing, they feel legitimate in investing in conservation and research globally, so that and plant conservation becomes validated as a part of the raison d'etre for gardens. Even though it was soft language, now it's formalized, and so you have a plan and to work towards.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we've got a whole team now of plant conservation staff in a laboratory, and that was pretty much justified using or developed with the rationale around the global strategy.
I was going to say, and I think if we really start pushing and investing in that conservation horticulture training, is getting places set up for what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and then going after it, that we could see those collections go up.
Do you just play devil's advocate, right? So do you think that you know, I mean, there's obviously this question about, you know, for all of the scale of this data set we analyzed, it's a relatively limited set of data reporting on a relatively limited number of botanic garden processes. And so there's certainly, and on the one hand, you can capture, as you can see with the ICCP, it can capture a really intensive international, you know, conservation program. But there's all sorts of conservation practices that it can't, it just can't really capture. And I'm just wondering.
There's a big difference between the number of threatened plants in a collection and the amount of conservation horticulture programs that are being done.
Yeah,
huge difference.
That's what I'm trying to say, and but more than that, is it? But you know, the sort of measures that we're using are still pretty standard measures, like number of individuals, number of species, threatened species in a collection. They're still quite, you know, very common, popularized benchmark characteristics that are probably.
It's useful, though.
You think they're useful?
Totally, it's useful in contextualizing the conversation. Otherwise, we wouldn't, like this. If the work you're doing hasn't been done, we wouldn't be having these conversations around. You know, how do we refine the reporting?
Okay, let me go the full hog on this then. Like, should we actually, and I'm sorry, I'm rolling back on my coming back to my point of disbelief. Is it a best use of our resources as botanic gardens to be maintaining really intensive sort of population level structures of threatened plants within our collections, or is that money best placed, you know, actually working way outside of our garden walls? And has that sort of cost benefit analysis really been explored? Because collections are just so expensive to maintain, right?
But I think it's the knowledge and the executive conservation is a possibility for a species as a part of the actions you take to conserve it. That helps drive action in the wild. We don't want to necessarily have to do the ex situ work if it's not necessary, because it's expensive. But if it helps the people that are managing the land at place to understand the importance of doing whatever they can to protect it in situ, because then they realize actually it's easier if we do it here, and you know, like we'll, you know, like control the pressures that the species is facing, instead of spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to propagate plants and then return them to be lost to the same threats that they're under in the wild. You know,
so
it helps that conversation move along. It does, definitely. I think what you know, the growth and focus of you know, people around conservation and horticulture, and us having that conversation as an industry, is really important in how we actually plan for and develop as a part of our programs, conservation horticulture as an industry, or as a skill set. That's we need to. It feels like it's just since the Melbourne conference really just starting to move. And being validated, and so we really need to invest more in those programs. And I think it's for us as a botanic garden, we are funded by our local residents of our city, and so we don't get a huge amount of national funding, and that's it's a challenge for us to justify a lot of the work we do. Because of the inherent tension of creating essentially an amenity for a local city, and then but also having the ability and you know, purpose to do this you know, national or international significant work, but you're funded by at a local level, and so there's an inherent tension there in terms of, you know, what are we doing, and how are we organizing ourselves in this space.
I would jump in with one other barrier that we're kind of overlooking. And this comes to me as we were doing a gap analysis of sort of the garden accreditation program within the Caribbean and Central American Botanic Garden Network. And one of the big things that came up as a barrier to getting accredited was actually having some sort of an accession program. And if you don't have an accession program, it becomes very difficult to then run a conservation horticulture program in terms of your tracking and your specimens and stuff like that. And that it leads gardens to be thinking, how could I run a program of conservation horticulture if I can't even just track what I have right now?
You mean like the software and database program?
Everything. Yeah, like
and
they just
the
go
processes.
the processes, the people, the software. That was that came up time and time again to gardens of why they're not going after accreditation. And the vast majority of gardens, if they have an accession program, and I think Patricia could probably get at this much better than I, that it's an Excel spreadsheet, kind of thing, and their ability to track within a nursery program can be difficult. And to even get a conservation horticulture program started, do you have a label maker? Can you do all those kinds of things? Well, in a lot of places, they don't have the money to get a label maker to track every specimen and do all that, kind of work, and especially you want to do with these threatened species.
I'd agree, and it's likely a very similar situation in the Pacific with a lot of the gardens that are still at that level of capacity, around struggling to even accession. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is one of the sort of secondary takeaways from this study, was that you contacted over 100 gardens and ended up with records from 50, and that you had to knock back simply because some were not appropriate and some that the data itself simply wasn't meeting the criteria of all of that. Because a botanic garden is nothing without its living collection, and a living collection is nothing if you don't have its pedigree, as it were. Which I think is the other elephant in the room, because we generate so much data, botanic gardens. There is just so much going on in terms of maintenance and propagation and tracing and all that sort of thing. That in itself, I think, is understated and underestimated a lot of the time, how much just how time intensive that is and how important that is. And I think it can often get put aside in favor of, as you say, the pressure of providing public amenity, just the weeding, the pruning, and the looking good, because we do want people to come in and generate revenue, that sort of thing. I've been going around in circles trying to figure out, how do you make record keeping sexy, as it was? How do you make people excited about keeping data, making those records? I think from the sound of it, the state of the gardens we're in, we're all very well set up, but it's something that we need to, I think, maybe work on mentoring or help facilitate with the gardens that are, as you say, they might just have the Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. I mean, Tessa, so the underbelly of this paper is a software bundle that we've been working on called BG Smarter. I don't know if you were in Singapore. Were you in Singapore? And because we did a workshop on the software package.
I did. I was coming down with COVID then.
That's okay.
It's a bit of a blur.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a bit of a blur for me too. But it's just so it's really a point about how do you make data sexy. Because, and it's also about making data sexy to the right people as well, right? So if you're a records officer or something, you find data sexy and you spend your whole life doing it. If you're a curator, it's 50% sexy. If you're the director of the garden and you're worrying about your next HR issue, it's about 0.1% sexy. And so it's really about showing leadership how you can leverage data in the same way that you do with a customer relations management system, which directors are going to get hugely excited about, because it means graphs that show you whether you're going the right way, whether you're making a profit, where your revenue is coming from, where your next demographic audience is going to be, and all this kind of stuff. And I think what we haven't done a good job as a kind of data generating community, and people like ourselves who are really interested in data, is demonstrate what we can show with that data, you know, and that's what we've been working on, and we're working with BGCI to try and roll that out. But I totally agree with you. Like we do need to change our relationship with living collections data in a big way. So I think it's a really good point.
I'm just aware that we've gone over time. It's probably 5 minutes until we're up for an hour. I'm happy to keep going because this is, as last time, was just a fantastic, meaty discussion. I do understand that most of you might have to tootle off. We've got another few minutes. Did anybody have any like last burning points that they wanted to get out there?
Yeah, a question for Sam. Of the 50 gardens that didn't supply data, a lot of them, were they because the data wasn't in a state of to be shared, or was it more like privacy and
Yeah, I mean, really good question. Really hard to disentangle everything. So, I mean, in reality, we probably sent hundreds of emails out, right, and got no response, which I think is a resourcing priority. Who the hell are these guys? Why do they want our data? Kind of gut reaction to an email. And then we had interviews with maybe 100 or so gardens, and then at some point in the interview, we might just realize that this garden just, you know, as some of the people have been saying, just don't have data. Like it's just not part of their operation. And so then you know, the conversation happens, and it's very interesting because we did connect with a lot of people and a lot of different cultures, and that in itself was very informative, really. But then you end up with 88 data sets, and then a lot of the time it's about data recency. So we can get a sense of data recency, how from people's own data, a sort of data health check, and a lot of it was around that, or just missing a key field. Sometimes, I mean, the crazy stories, like there are big European gardens that are documenting when plants come in, but they don't document when plants die. And so when you look
so
at
the
their
list is
growth,
growing. The list is growing.
it's just like you do it, and it's like, wow, we've got a new Guinness Book of World Records here. You know, move over queue.
But deaccessioning is something that's missing in a lot of collection policies.
Sure.
So as I review them with the accreditation, is the one thing I said, you're missing your deaccessioning process in your collection policy, and I do that a lot. It's quite common.
It's fascinating,
but also like keeping the data of the deaccessioning. You know, it's because you know, someone when they're doing the stock take or
do
the
not
audit,
delete. Do not delete,
because it's like it may be just like not present at that time.
Do not reuse. You do not reuse succession number. Do not delete.
Yeah. So there's a huge. I think sounds like. Are you able to talk a bit about BG Smart, the work you're doing there, Sam? Is that?
Yeah. So
I got to jump in and say I got to get off to another call. It was a great conversation. I would love to continue this.
Yeah, thank you so much for popping in and giving us your perspectives. Very much appreciated.
All right, thank you.
So Tim, this started out as, you know, we launched our living collection strategy in 2019, and then the pandemic struck literally like 3 months later. So we had all these grand plans that just got put on ice, and so it's sort of brainchild of Angie, who's my deputy curator and colleague, and you know, she was in Spain, she decamped to Spain, I was here, and we started talking about, well, you know, how do we measure progress towards living collection strategy? And it's just so hard to extract signal from living collections data. So we started, well, Angie, you know, she's the code writer. She started writing code in R that would basically, you know, ask a set of questions, and it would allow us to very quickly, iteratively do analyses, a bit like the ones we see here, where you just look at, you know, trajectories, longitudinal analyses, growth curves over time, but focused at your living as an individual living collection. And so we built that, and you know, that will generate about 250 graphs in very little time. Like you click a button, and then like 2 minutes later you've got, you know, you're overloaded with graphical insights. Like it's too much actually. And and then we started to reach out to other gardens and started, slowly building a meta collection almost unintentionally, and then started to realize, like, hey, there's actually something really emergent that comes out of, applying these tools to a meta collection. So what I'm trying to say is that the same tools that make these graphs were originally designed for an individual collection. And they, more than that, they can be applied to sub collections. So you could look at a single bed, or you could look at the collection within control of a particular horticulturalist or a particular curator. It's a little bit invasive and insidious, but you can really begin to evaluate performance at different levels in your collection. And so we've got that R package, and we're not, it's designed to be open. It's not really bug free. That's the only reason we haven't released it. And but we're very happy to run that on anyone's garden. And I think we've run it on Melbourne garden, maybe through a different colleague, but we could run it on yours, Tim, for example.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to explore the data. I mean, it's just something that would really inform things like collection reviews and
exactly
our management plans, and help us understand more, the ways where to focus on with those reviews. Have you looked at integrating that with plant search at all?
That's exactly what we're thinking. So we're just waiting on and have been waiting on a grant application to come back, which Patricia and I wrote, to do exactly that. So the idea would be that you submit your accession level data to plant search. It would have to be a slightly different submission for this to work, because it relies on both existing and non-existing accessions to map that longitudinal data. But once you do that, your reward, if you like, your incentive for doing that is then to get these data insights back. And I think that goes back to Tessa's point about making data sexy and making it just really appeal to people. But that's the kind of thing you need to automate it for people, because it's just time consuming to do. Right?
Yeah, so we're looking as part of this wider work of the fields in plant search for accession level are there. They're just not, and they were designed for the GCCs, the Global Conservation Consortia. They just haven't been released fully because there's just far too many. So there's a piece of work to condense it and then release plant search for accession levels and tied in with funding waiting for funding to be decided, so that we can basically plug BG Smarter to be that carrot at the end of people putting their data in. The more data there is, the better these analyses around the world can be done, and then the gardens can then assess their own collections in different ways with BG Smarter. And together with that, for me, I think it's not only the data piece, but the helping gardens understand what some of those graphs might tell them, because I think it's part of that conservation horticulture maturity that need to happen and continue in gardens, that some gardens might have those teams that can go, oh yeah, look, this does that, and I can use it that way, but some gardens might just go like,
some people,
what's that mean?
We found we've had to train, it's almost like we're not deliberately training, but we definitely like talk through graphs with colleagues for whom graphs are just not a natural way to communicate or understand, and particularly horticulturalists. And I think they kind of absorb it by osmosis, and there's also a generational thing. I think the younger hort staff are a little bit more comfortable with it, but
a lot of it is contextual, though, isn't it? And it's like how you structure that data and those conversations around, this is the significance of the data and this is what it's showing. And it's like how, if people don't inherently understand accessioning or the role of gardens, then it's more difficult for them to sort of apply that knowledge in a contextual way.
I mean, I should say that, so Patricia and I generally talking most days, and so we've been working on various things. BG Smarter is one of them, but we've also put together we've got a paper which we're floating around various people. Tessa, I think I sent it to Claire Hart initially, but I guess she's super busy. But basically,
Send it to me.
Huh?
Send it to me.
Yeah, I think I'll send it to you. And Tim, if you could pop your email in the chat, I'd send it to you as well. Basically, we've written a vision for the a data ecosystem and how data needs to be managed sort of across the Botanic Garden. You know, there's nothing super original in it, and I think people read it and be like, yeah, you know, we've been wanting that for decades. But it's still a really important articulation. Thanks, Tim. And we just want, you know, the paper's written. We just want people to sign on to it as co-authors, as a kind of endorsement of it. And we're going to try and land it in a reasonably impactful journal, just to try and coalesce this community around the importance of our data and the importance of making it sexy. And
Yeah,
so
send it through.
Tessa, I got your email, so I can send it to both of you. And yeah, happy for you to take a look at. You know, no pressure, but would welcome your
send it through.
involvement.
I can. Yeah. Claire is pretty busy, but I can give her the footnotes.
Well, either you or Claire or both is good.
Yeah, no worries.
I really appreciate the organising the meeting and great to have a conversation. It's really useful for us to
thank you for coming and contributing as well. Extra perspectives is always just fascinating. And I guess we'll close it off there. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming along and adding your insight. This will be recorded. This will be put up online. You'll be able to view it later. And of course, if the second one next week is mostly scheduled to be convenient for Australians, Tim, if you want to come back in, that would be fantastic as well. But otherwise, thanks again. This was a fantastic conversation. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, and good night. See ya.
Thanks,
Tessa.
Bye.
Hey.